Okay, so today we're diving deep into one of the most tense and really strategic geopolitical situations unfolding right now.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about the escalating situation between the United States and Iran.
It's such a high-stakes dynamic. It touches global stability, oil markets, the whole balance of power, really.
And our mission here for this deep dive is basically to unpack the critical bits of this very complex relationship. We want to understand the current flashpoints
Right.
and maybe explore what could be coming next.
Right, and we're basing this on a specific source. It's a video script from early 2025.
That's right, titled USA versus Iran 2025, Rising Tensions, Proxy Wars, and the Fight for Global Influence.
Okay, so context first. Let's set the stage a bit. This U.S.-Iran relationship, it's been complicated for, what, over 4 decades?
Oh yeah, easily. Ever since the 1979 Islamic Revolution and the hostage crisis that came right after.
They've rarely, if ever, been on the same page since then.
And that's really the crucial starting point.
Hmm.
But the tensions, they really cranked up after the U.S. pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal.
The JCPOA.
Exactly, the GCPOA. That was back in 2018 under President Trump. And that withdrawal, it wasn't just carrying up a piece of paper.
No.
It led straight to more sanctions, a lot more threats flying back and forth, and a real uptick in these proxy battles across the region.
Which pretty much sets the scene for where we find ourselves right now in early 2025.
Precisely.
And fast forward to today, things are, well, undeniably heating up. One clear sign is the increased military presence, right, in the Persian Gulf.
Definitely. We're seeing the U.S. bolstering its forces there. The trigger event mentioned in the source was Iran allegedly targeting a U.S. drone.
In international airspace, yeah.
Right. But what's really telling here, and the source highlights this, is how differently each side frames it.
How so?
Well, the Pentagon calls their buildup defensive measure, standard procedure, protecting assets, that kind of thing.
Okay.
But Iran, they label it provocative and illegal. And this isn't just spin.
It shows the gap.
It shows the massive trust deficit. Even basic facts get interpreted in completely opposite ways. It makes finding common ground, well, almost impossible without some major shift.
Okay, so the military posturing is one thing, but the nuclear program, that feels like the real powder keg here.
It absolutely is. It's
Yeah.
front and center. Iran has resumed enriching uranium beyond the 60% level.
60%. Wow. Just to put that in perspective for everyone, that's way above the limit in the old deal, the JCPOA.
Significantly above it, and it's alarmingly close to weapons-grade material.
Right.
So the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, they've put out statements expressing serious concern.
The nuclear watchdog.
Yeah. And the U.S., in response, is pushing hard for what they call snapback sanctions, reimposing UN sanctions that were lifted under the deal.
And the implications of this, I mean, a nuclear-armed Iran.
It would just fundamentally change the entire strategic map of the Middle East. That's the bottom line. And preventing that is a core U.S. objective.
Okay, so beyond the nuclear issue, which is huge, we're also seeing these frequent clashes, these engagements in proxy conflicts.
Yeah, constantly. Places like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen. These are active zones where Iranian-backed militias and U.S. forces are bumping up against each other more and more.
And the source actually mentioned several attacks, specifically in Baghdad and Erbil.
Just in the past month alone,
Oh,
yeah.
really?
It's a really complex and, frankly, tragic web.
And both sides just blame each other.
Pretty much. Each side points the finger, claiming the other started it.
Hmm.
But the grim reality, is that it's civilians who consistently pay the highest price in all this. And what's really striking is that neither side seems willing to give an inch in this struggle for regional influence.
And the conflict isn't just boots on the ground or missiles anymore, right? It's moved online, the cyber front.
Oh, absolutely. Welcome to 21st century conflict. According to U.S. intelligence cited in the source, Iranian hackers targeted key infrastructure systems
Where?
on the U.S. East Coast earlier this year. Critical stuff.
Wow. And did the U.S. respond?
Well, the source says that in retaliation, the U.S. reportedly disabled parts of Iran's oil export tracking systems.
So tit for tat in cyberspace.
Exactly. It's this sort of invisible war,
Yeah.
but with very real, very tangible impacts on infrastructure, on the economy.
So with all these flashpoints, military, nuclear, proxy, cyber, you'd think maybe diplomacy would be in overdrive? Any hope there?
Well, the source describes it as a diplomatic stalemate, unfortunately.
Really? No talks.
There are efforts. Qatar and Oman, they've been trying to mediate, act as go-betweens.
Okay, some back channels then.
Right. But the insiders quoted, they suggest the trust deficit is bigger than ever.
That phrase again, trust deficit.
It's the key obstacle. Without any direct communication or even a shared basis of trust, real de-escalation is incredibly difficult. It's like two chess players who refuse to even look at the same board.
Okay, so let's connect this back. What does all this mean for, for you listening, for global markets, for the wider world?
Well, first off, global oil prices. That's a direct hit.
Yeah. Because of the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly. The world's most critical oil choke point. About a fifth of the world's oil passes through there. Any tension, any hint of disruption.
And the markets react instantly. The source mentioned a 12% jump in oil prices back in May.
Just in May alone, yeah. Driven by these exact tensions. So that's an immediate economic impact you feel.
But it's bigger than just oil prices,
How
right?
about much bigger? There's a significant risk of this spilling over into a wider war.
How so?
Just think about it. A single miscalculation, a misinterpreted signal, an accidental clash. It could easily drag in other powers.
Like who?
Israel, Saudi Arabia, they have huge stakes in this. But also potentially Russia, maybe even NATO allies getting involved depending on the scenario.
So the old saying, what starts in the Gulf doesn't stay there.
That's exactly it. The ripple effects could be global.
Okay, let's try and understand what each side actually wants here. Amidst all this tension, what are their goals? Let's start with the U.S.
From the U.S. perspective, according to the source, the objectives seem pretty clear. 1, halt Iran's uranium enrichment, especially at these higher levels.
Okay.
2, get Iran to pull back its support from those proxy groups destabilizing the region.
Makes sense.
And 3, ideally, negotiate a new nuclear deal, but one with much stricter verification measures this time.
And maybe longer timelines, the so-called sunset clauses?
Potentially, yes. Stronger and longer, basically.
Okay, so that's the U.S. wish list. What about Iran? What are they aiming for?
Well, first and foremost, Iran wants the crippling economic sanctions lifted. That's goal number 1.
The ones reimposed after the U.S. left the JCPOA, and maybe newer ones too?
Precisely. They also want recognition of their regional influence. They see themselves as a major power and want that acknowledged.
Right.
And crucially, they want guarantees. Guarantees that the U.S. won't just walk away from any future deal like they did last time.
That's the trust deficit again, biting hard.
Absolutely. And what's really insightful, I think, is that both sides seem to be using the current tension as leverage.
How do you mean?
Well, they're sort of escalating things, creating pressure, trying to build bargaining chips before they even get to a potential negotiation table. It's all about gaining leverage now for later.
So it's a dangerous game of chicken almost. Where could this actually go? The source outlined a few potential paths forward, right?
Yeah, a few scenarios. The first, and perhaps most worrying, is straightforward escalation.
Meaning?
Proxy clashes get worse, maybe deadlier, miscalculations happen, and the chance of a direct U.S.-Iran military confrontation goes way up.
Okay, that's the grim one. What else?
Then there's the possibility of back-channel diplomacy actually working. Quiet de-escalation.
Through those mediators like Qatar and Oman.
Exactly. It would be a subtle, high-stakes dance, mostly happening behind closed doors, trying to pull things back from the brink without anyone losing face publicly.
A diplomatic tightrope walk.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then there's a third path, intensified economic warfare.
More sanctions.
More sanctions, yeah, which could potentially push Iran even further away from the West and deeper into the orbit of countries like China and Russia, looking for economic lifelines.
So it's not just a U.S.-Iran thing. It's got these global power dynamics woven all through it.
Absolutely. It's a multi-layered chessboard.
And how is all this being talked about? How is it perceived? The narratives must be wildly different.
Oh, completely. The source touches on this too. On social media, for instance, you see totally divided responses.
Like what?
Some arguing the U.S. is, policing the world unnecessarily, overreaching.
Okay.
Others looking at Iran's actions, the enrichment, the proxies, and seeing a clear threat that absolutely needs a firm response. Very polarized.
I mean, what about mainstream media?
A distinct split there, too, as you'd expect. U.S. media, the source notes, tends to focus heavily on the nuclear aspect, the proliferation risk. That's often the main headline.
Right.
Whereas Iranian state media consistently frames the entire situation through a lens of imperialism versus resistance.
Resisting U.S. pressure and influence.
Exactly. Which just, highlights how important it is to try and see these things from multiple angles.
Yeah.
The public understanding gets shaped so much by these narratives.
Yeah, it really underscores why considering different perspectives is crucial. The story changes depending on who's telling it and what their underlying motivations are.
Definitely. It's a constant reminder with these complex global issues.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've really unpacked quite a bit here. The multifaceted nature of this U.S.-Iran relationship. It's clearly a high-stakes chess game.
with very real human consequences, yeah.
Absolutely.
And thinking about that core problem, that trust deficit that kept coming up in the source material, maybe the question to leave you with is this.
Okay.
What are the really deep, maybe unspoken assumptions? Or the historical grievances on both sides that make it so hard for either one to make that first, genuinely de-escalatory move?
What's stopping them from blinking first, essentially?
Right. And if traditional diplomacy is stuck because of that chasm of trust, what kind of breakthrough, something maybe beyond traditional diplomacy, could possibly bridge that gap?
That's a really challenging question. Something fundamental perhaps needs to shift.
It seems like it might, and that's definitely something worth pondering.